All right, Shari, we are doing God's speech part 2.
Part
Made
two.
it. We made it through most of chapter 38, and now we're starting kind of a section that involves wildlife, animals. So I'm going to start in chapter 38, verse 39, and read all the way through 39.
Oh, wait. Wrong book.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Can you hunt the prey for the lion or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their thicket? Who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God for help and wander about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? Can you number the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time when they give birth? When they crouch, bring forth their offspring, and are delivered of their young. The young ones become strong. They grow up in the open. They go out and do not return to them. Who has let the wild donkey go free? Who has loosed the bonds of the swift donkey? To whom I have given the arid plain for his home and the salt land for his dwelling place. He scorns the tumult of the city and hears not the shouts of the driver. He ranges the mountains as his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind him in the furrow with ropes, or will he harrow the valleys after you? Will you depend on him because his strength is great, and will you leave to him your labor? Do you have faith in him that he will return your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are they the pinions and plumage of love? For she leaves her eggs on the earth and lets them be warmed on the ground, forgetting that a foot may crush them and that a wild beast may trample them. She deals cruelly with her young as if they were not hers, though her labor be in vain, yet she has no fear, because God has made her forget wisdom and given her no share in understanding. When she rouses herself to flee, she laughs at the horse and his rider. Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck and mane with a mane? Do you make him leap like a locust? His majestic snorting is terrifying. He paws in the valley and exults in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed. He does not turn back from the sword. Upon him rattle the quiver, the flashing spear, and the javelin. With fierceness and rage he swallows the ground. He cannot stand still at the sound of the trumpet. When the trumpet sounds, he says, "Aha!" He smells the battle from afar, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spreads his wings towards the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest on high? On the rock he dwells and makes his home, on the rocky crag and stronghold. From there he spies out the prey, his eyes behold it from far away. His young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there he is.
I read these from Meister Eckhart the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And this came to mind just reading this chapter. A wide wilderness. You will not find me in the usual places. Come to the desert if you'd like to see. Look where you might become lost for a while. There is a wide wilderness in me. I really like that. And yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's perfect because like this, all these animals, the whole panorama of what God is showing, it is the wilderness.
Yeah, there is a
lot
in me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, let me read this little bit from Chesterton, what he says about, this is in Chesterton's introduction to the book of Job. He says the mechanical optimist endeavors to justify the universe avowedly upon the ground that it has a rational and consecutive pattern. He points out that the fine thing, so this is God. God points out that the fine thing about the world is that it can't, or no, sorry. The rational optimist points out that the fine thing about the world is that it can all be explained. This is the one point, if I may put it so, on which God, in return, is explicit to the point of violence. God says, in effect, that if there is one fine thing about the world as far as men are concerned, is that it cannot be explained. He insists on the inexplicableness of everything. Hath the rain a father, out of whose womb came the ice? He goes farther and insists on the positive and palpable unreason of things. Hast thou sent the rain upon the desert where no man is, and upon the wilderness where there is no man? God will make man see things if it is only against the black background of non-entity. God will make Job see a startling universe if he can only do it by making Job see an idiotic universe. To startle man, God must become for an instant a blasphemer. One might almost say that God becomes for an instant an atheist. He unrolls before Job a long panorama of created things: the horse, the eagle, the raven, the wild ass, the peacock, the ostrich, and the crocodile. He does so, each of them, that it sounds like a monster walking in the sun. The whole is a sort of psalm or rhapsody of the sense of wonder. The maker of all things is astonished at the things he himself has made.
Mm.
I'll just read this next section because it applies. This we may call the third point. Job puts forward a note of interrogation. God answers with a note of exclamation. Instead of proving to Job that it is an explicable world, he insists that it's a much stranger world than Job ever thought it was. Lastly, the poet has achieved in this speech, with that unconscious artistry, accuracy found in so many of the simpler epics, another and much more delicate thing. Without once relaxing the rigid impenetrability of Jehovah in his deliberate declaration, he has contrived to let fall here and there in the metaphors, in the parenthetical imagery, sudden and splendid suggestions that the secret of God is bright and not a sad one, a semi-accidental suggestion like light seen for an instant through the crack of a closed door.
Nice.
I think, like, we're obviously looking into the wilderness. We're looking at, like, first of all, the lion, and then it's ended with the birds of prey who are sucking up blood, and eating the slain. And so there's a certain sort of what is it, darkness or
violence,
violence, yep, that's playing in the text, but like Chesterton's saying, there's like all these sort of wonderful things that sort of creep through, and yeah.
Well, it feels to me like, what we see is the violence, right? Like, we see the lion killing its prey. We see the ostrich egg being stepped on. We see the battleground and the birds of prey feeding on the corpses. We see, that's what we see. And this kind of gets back to Job 28, right? The wisdom poem. We see everything on the surface, but God's trying to direct our gaze a little below that, below it. So I think the best example there is, I mean, they're all good examples, but one that's easy to see is the ostrich, right? God actually says, she does all these dumb things. She's kind of stupid, but look at how beautiful she runs, right?
Right.
And I don't know what you think about the warhorse. It's kind of interesting because there's a like, everything seems to be, well, I guess it fits actually. it seems to be contradictory in a sense, right? Like there's a feeling of contradiction here. And so you have this beautiful horse, and it's willing to throw itself into the battle, which seems like
why would a horse want to do that?
Well, because it's a flight animal.
Yeah.
Right? It's normally running away from danger, but this is a horse running into it. So that's what I mean about the contradictory nature of a lot of the things that God is showing Job here. Like with the young lions, he says, well, who's feeding them? I am, right? And I think you pointed out a while ago that was it Eliphaz says something like God breaks the jaws of the lions, or
it's in chapter 4. I can find it real fast.
Yeah,
it is Eliphaz, and this is what he has to say. But this is one of those times I've mentioned before where like a word or a phrase or something that God uses will appear like one other time,
right,
in the book. And I think the lion is one of those times. And the only other time the lion's mentioned is Eliphaz in chapter 4. So remember in chapter 3, Job cries out, says, I wish I was unborn.
right.
And then Eliphaz kind of in his response says, what verse is it? 10 and 11. I'm going to start in 7 though. He says, remember who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off? As I have seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. That's the doctrine of retribution.
Yeah.
By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they are consumed. The roar of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, the teeth of the young lions are broken. The strong lion perishes for lack of prey, and the cubs of the lioness are scattered. So he's talking about those that plow iniquity and sow trouble. So the wicked are like the lion, and God's going to crush the lion. And here we have God saying, who hunts for the lion?
Right.
Who satisfies their appetite? And
right.
it's implied that God is doing that.
Yeah, you've got this person on the one hand who's obscuring, remember? Obscuring. That's how God starts out his whole speech. Who's darkening, right? Who's obscuring? With God's destroying the lions. He's tearing their jaws open, all this, stuff. And then God says, no, I'm actually feeding them. It's a complete contradiction. It's a total contradiction. And I mean, there's a lot to take from every example and the details of those examples, of course. But if you just look at the thing as a whole, it seems to be just breaking all of the presuppositions, right, about God. It's contradicting them. And the reason I want to emphasize that is because I think that we think of these things as being opposite, and God is somehow bringing them together, right? Like this is the reconciliation of or the coincidence of opposites, of how we have to learn to keep things in tension, right? And not just fall into duality where it's this way or that way, but it's both of those things, right? God does break the jaw of the lion sometimes, right? There are examples of that, but he also feeds them. And so I think the deeper wisdom, like from 28, is found in the reconciliation of those two things, right? And then like this is why I'm not personally comfortable with language like with the simple how do I put this? With the simple articulation or the simple understanding of, the sheep and the goats, the elect and the unelect, the righteous and the wicked. You've got all this language going on all the time. And it seems to me that whenever God steps in and has anything to say, he's always talking about how do we keep these things in tension, right? Because we are that. We are a coincidence of opposites. Like Paul says that in I don't know what letter. I would like to do the good thing, but I do the bad thing. And when I, like, so as individuals, we live with that tension. So how are we going to deal with it? Are we going to think of ourselves as terrible because we don't have the upper hand? Are we going to fall into despair because we're down at the bottom of ourselves? Or is holding those things in tension the way to transcend all of it? And I personally think it is.
Yeah, that's really good, Shari. Because like Job himself is holding something in tension, which is that he's maintaining his innocence, and then he knows that God's done this, yet God he's still holding on to hope that God will hear him.
Right.
And so, but Job in his final complaint, his complaint is all about justice, right? He's like, he's like, let's get this settled. God, I want you to indict me because this doesn't make any sense. And it's kind of like what Chesterton is saying here. God is saying like, well, let me point out a lot of other things that don't make sense, that can't be easily explained.
Yeah, like you were saying the last time that you read something, I think, of Chesterton last time, where he said God is that the word he used? Confounds the questions that Job has.
He what does he say? He multiplies them.
Yeah, like he makes them even more
propounds. That's what he says.
Propounds. That's the word. Yeah. 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 And I like we talked about last time, I don't think God's trying to make fun of Job by doing that. I think he's trying to show him something that he wouldn't see if he just gave him a straight answer, right? Like Job has to be engaged. So he gets questions. And the questions are more complicated than what he's even asked, which they were already profound questions from Job, right? And now the questions are even more confusing, simply put.
Right.
And so
and straight contradictory to what everyone was talking about.
Right. So now you can either skate across the top of them and just say, well, I don't get it, and that's blah blah blah, ignore it, or you can dive into it, and it's going to be deep water there, right? Because you're going to be dealing with paradox. Basically, you're dealing with paradox.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Even though it's paradox, there's a theme that goes through the whole thing, which is God's care,
right?
And the even the line at the very end where he says, the young ones suck up the blood where the slain are. There he is. Like, but these birds are eating. They're feeding.
Yeah.
Like this is such, this is the, it just looking at nature, you're like, if you think justice is a problem, well, what about all this other stuff that's happening in the world? Like, what is God doing?
Right.
Like, because it looks like a horror show sometimes, and people will even, like, I was on Twitter and someone said just the fact that animals have to eat other animals should just be proof enough that there isn't a God. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're just tweeting these one-liners.
Yeah.
But I mean, like there's something to that. We're like, yeah, that's kind of like, what the heck?
Well, that's moralizing, right? That's assuming
Right.
that killing another animal is a bad thing to do. But
Well,
try
yeah.
not try living in a world where nothing dies.
Right.
Right? Like where everything lives its fullest, however many years and never stops reproducing. I mean, there's small examples of that in Yellowstone, for example, when they got
Mhm.
when they
The
had to
wolves.
reintroduce predators, right? Because the herbivores were destroying their own food sources.
Mm-hmm. There were countless species that
They were
were,
actually killing themselves,
yeah, yeah.
right? So, like, this is the delicate balance that we're all aware of, right?
Mm-hmm.
The like Michael Martin said, the circle of life from The Lion King,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's also more than that, because if we can look at that as just the harsh reality of nature, or
Uh-huh.
we can understand it as God telling us something about himself. And I think that that's what he's doing. I think that creation speaks of God. It gives us his a way of understanding his character, the character of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something I think most people are willing to accept if they look at it, because it's harsh,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you want to moralize it, you're never going to understand it. You're
Right.
starting off on the wrong foot right
Right.
away.
You're
Right
just like,
away.
wolves are bad. Let's get rid of the wolves, and then we won't have problems. And
Yeah.
then you don't understand how the world works if you think that way.
Right.
Like, you
Right.
don't understand how Yellowstone works. And then
Right.
it's not until we reintroduce the wolves that all this stuff started. I was just watching something about that the other day. Like,
Yeah.
whole rivers changed course
I
because
know.
the deer would overgraze something. They'd eat up all the little saplings of oak or I forget exactly what tree it
Mhm.
was. But those were the trees that would really hold the ground in place. So the rivers were just eating up that ground. But then when the trees were able to take root, the
Yep.
river would have to move around. And then that brought back beavers, because there's a certain tree that the beavers liked that the deer was eating. So then the beavers made their dams, and then these huge these beaver ponds formed, and then all these other species started coming back to the park, all because the wolves were allowed back in. Because when the
Right.
wolves made a kill, the deer would avoid that area for weeks and months.
Yeah. They also put pressure on them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they hunt them, and
Mm-hmm.
then the deer move around, and then they don't overgraze
Yep.
their own backyard, basically, right?
Yeah. Have you ever read?
And they don't overpopulate because some of them get eaten on a
Right.
regular basis.
Right. Have you ever read Farley Moat, Never Cry Wolf?
Yes.
Yeah, that is such a good book, because it's exactly that. He
Yeah.
for for those who don't know about the story, he gets hired by the Canadian government to go try to figure out, there's dwindling elk and
Caribou.
caribou
Caribou.
populations.
Yeah.
And so they think it's the wolves that are growing too big in numbers, so that they're over hunting the caribou or whatever. And so he goes out to study the wolves, and like, it's such a good book. It's hilarious too.
Yeah.
But he like sees how the wolves take care of the herd,
Mhm.
and they're not just like vicious
Oppor-
machines, just eating and killing every chance they get. They're like
they're not, yeah, they're not like opportunistic. You
they're
know,
like
it's a,
moving with the herd. They're like
yeah.
traveling with it. They you know, like you said, they're constantly just putting pressure on it, you
Yeah.
know, taking the sick and the weak ones. And yeah, but then when it's such a funny story because he's also dealing with the Canadian government, which is just a good story about the government where they don't like the idea that the wolves are actually good for it.
No.
And what he actually found is like there's this guy he would go and visit, this native guy, and whenever he would go to his house, uh it was just there was just caribou bones like all over the place and like pelts and stuff
Oh,
like
he was killing.
people were over hunting the
Yeah.
caribou and people didn't like the wolves, so they were going to blame the wolves because the wolves
Yeah.
were causing problems, killing their livestock and whatever.
Yeah.
But when he sent back his idea, they were like, that's probably not it.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. And there's a standing bounty on wolves year round in where I live right here.
Mm-hmm.
You can shoot a wolf whenever you want,
Oh, wow.
which I find appalling.
Yeah.
I've had wolves within 50 yards at
Mm,
night. I've never, haven't seen them, but they've howled like and
right.
right there. I've never been afraid of a wolf. Never. And I've never had any of my livestock taken by wolves, but I have good dogs, right?
Right.
Too. Yeah, anyway, I have a problem with all that, but
Okay. So
we should be grateful for these things.
God's taking, well, let me talk about this too. So it says, can you hunt the prey for the lion or satisfy the appetite for the young lions? And one of the things I think about, for this, and also that line at the end where it's talking about the eagle and the young, and I'm like, well, who, like, for Christians, like the foundation of creation is Christ and Him crucified, and in the Eucharist we eat and drink His blood.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a way in which God is saying, when God's saying, I feed the lions,
Yeah.
He's saying, I give myself
Mm,
to
that's
my creation.
right. Yes. Exactly.
And and like the animals that end up being preyed upon is like, that's me. And
This reminds me of that story.
yeah, I was about to say the same thing.
Were you?
Yeah.
Yeah, where the Anouk story that where when the hunter goes out, if he doesn't find anything, it's because the animals are hiding from him.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have to give their lives to the hunter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
tell the creation story. Do you remember it?
I'm trying to remember. Give me a hint.
I can tell it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the is it the Inuk
Yeah.
in Alaska, the native people in Alaska, they had a creation story that the Orthodox monks who traveled there wrote about and relayed, which was that man came to the first Inuk people came in a little boat and came to the shore, and they were naked and kind of struggling and afraid, and the animals saw them,
Right.
and the animals felt sorry for them, and they're like, look at them, they're pathetic, they're weak, they've had this soft pink skin, they don't have armor, they don't have antlers to protect themselves, they can't run fast, their feet are soft, and
that's all true.
it's all true.
It's
and so
all true.
but in their creation story, the animals say, but we see something in them, we love them, and so what we'll do is we'll give ourselves to them, we'll give our fur, we'll give our meat, so that they can live. And so whenever they go hunting, like you were saying, the animal gives themselves to the hunter. Like, you don't go hunting and find them and kill them. You go out and the animal will find you and give themselves to you.
Yeah, and then there's that other story where that boy goes out because him and his grandmother are starving. Remember? And he goes out and
Mm-hmm.
he finds a mouse or something really tiny, and he decides. Took him 2 weeks till the mouse gave itself to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he took it, and without gratitude and without thinking of his grandmother, he ate it for himself. And then the story continues where he just keeps meeting bigger and bigger animals, right?
But he just always eats them.
But he always eats them for himself. And so there's this, even in the Inuk mythology, there's this idea of this incarnational Eucharistic aspect to
Mm-hmm.
life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is
Yeah.
what you just said. God is giving himself
Yeah.
to his creation. And then of course that reminds me of that other Meister Eckhart thing where, he says God is green. Did
I don't
you
remember that.
oh
Was it recently you posted that?
yeah, God is green, and then he describes God as being on a here. What does God do all day long? He gives birth.
Hmm.
From the beginning of eternity, God lies on a maternity bed, giving birth to all. God is creating this whole universe full and entire in this present moment. That's Meister Eckhart again. And then he says, if you could see just for a moment, a split second in time, the eternally green birthing power of God, you would not be able to recall your past and present suffering and pain. Which is an interesting quote in light of Job, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, it makes me think that like when women give birth, I've heard this, that I mean, there's so much sort of pain and struggle in birth.
Yeah.
And then, but once the baby's born and then you hold it and stuff, like all this stuff happens to you, like all these endorphins and whatever. And it actually makes you forget the pain, makes you,
Yeah.
um,
You don't remember it
it
unless,
makes it all worth it.
of
Sort of.
course, something like super traumatic has
Right,
happened.
right.
And it depends on your personality. Some women just can't forget the pain.
Right.
But
And they're like, never again.
but I've seen animals do it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen them labor for hours, sometimes difficult labors, sometimes difficult births. And then as soon as that baby hits the ground, everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They got to keep it clean. They got to get it to the teat.
Mm-hmm.
They suddenly are aware of their surroundings, and anything foreign is chased off.
Mm-hmm.
I had a sheep one year who lambed, and it was her first time. And I think the first one came quickly and unawares. And then the second one, so she left it on the ground, and then she had the second one and busied herself with the second one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because after the first one came, the second one was coming right away, and then she was, because it was her first time, she was caught up in what was happening. And what ended up happening was the ravens got the first one. And by the time I found her, the first one had died. I don't know, maybe it was born dead even. I wasn't there for it.
Right.
It was dead. And she was a few yards away with the second one. And it was up and standing, but she had her two front legs like this, and it was under her belly. And she was just staring at the ravens eating her first one. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And she walked with that baby between her two front legs for 3 days. I never saw a sheep or a goat do that before.
Just protecting it.
She was so terrified that those ravens would come and get her baby, right?
Wow.
And then that baby actually grew up to be a real knucklehead because she protected it all the time.
She overprotected it.
She overprotected it, and it's never good for them when that happens,
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Well, that's almost That's
Yeah.
almost exactly what's here in the first part of chapter 39 about, do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the does?
Yeah.
And this is kind of like one of those things where, like, how do you give birth on the side of a mountain?
Oh
Like,
man.
what are they, can you, and then at desk, can you number the months that they fulfill? And do you know the time they give birth when they crouch and bring forth their offspring and are delivered of their young?
Mhm.
Um, and there's some interesting stuff in here. I don't know what to make of it, so I probably won't get into it. But they deliver their newborn. The word there for newborn means a rope, a measuring line. Uh,
What?
yeah. In
Weird.
other places, it's translated region, rope, portion. Um, and I this is all just loose in my head, but there's later on when it talks about Leviathan, it asks, can you tie down his tongue with a cord? And there's something like that. So
Well, I'm
those,
wondering. My first thought is birth umbilical cord,
right.
right? So maybe it has something to do with that.
That's why they translate it newborn here in Job,
Okay.
but it actually means a rope, a measuring line. And in everywhere else, well, as far as I can see in the Hebrew, it's translated region, 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 rope,
Region.
portion, 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 group, coast, group, with the line, lines,
What's
line,
the
line.
exact word you're looking at?
The exact word, the Hebrew word is chebel.
And what is that in
It,
the
it,
English?
it
Newborn?
means it means a rope, a
Yeah, but is
measuring
that,
line.
yeah, but is that the newborn?
That's the word for that's translated newborn in this section.
Oh, weird.
So
I'm really
there's
confused.
something in, I'll, this is part of why Job is so complex, because this is actually like um the lamb of the mountain goats um is like this cord, this measuring line that like
Mm,
marks off regions. And then I think it has something to do with, I'll just read Job 41. It says, can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, or press down his tongue with a cord, or press down his tongue with a rope?
the
And
same,
it's the same
same
word.
word. Okay, Joseph, we need your help on this.
Well, there's that one image.
Yeah, that image. You have it?
Well,
You should show it.
well, let me find it real fast.
It's medieval, right?
I know I should just be saving this for when we're talking about Leviathan, but
Okay, well, you can.
I'll no, I'll show it. Let me share my screen. So here's the image, and it's so here's Leviathan at the bottom, this monster, sea monster, twisting, coiled.
Yeah.
Um
Okay, I
here,
just figured out the rope and the measure. It must mean lineage. Like, isn't that the rope that connects you? Like your family lineage, your ancestry? Because that's what this
mm-hmm,
is. That rope is an ancestry.
mm-hmm.
And so it makes sense that every new birth is a part of that rope, right?
Yeah, and well, this is God the Father, and this is literally the line of David.
Yes.
It's the line of David, and then there's Christ down here, and it's piercing the jaw
Leviathan,
with a hook. And so that's the cord that's tying its tongue down.
right?
So anyway, I just find that, I don't know quite what to make of it, but it's fascinating.
It is. Yeah, but don't so okay, but back to this word chabel. Is that what it is? Chabel,
Mm-hmm.
meaning a rope
Mm-hmm.
or a measure or a region. it feels to me like that has something to do with this idea of ancestry.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could even be like a region could be like, you know, Israel was a people and they also had a region, an area that was marked out for them in the promised land.
Yeah,
You know,
I would go so far as to say that most regions were family, like how do I put this?
right.
It was tribes were families, right? Like,
yep.
and so they were, yeah, they were the ancestors of,
Right. That's yeah, I think that's right.
yeah.
So what does this mean that the mountain goats are giving birth to their it's because it's talking about this sort of the wild because the mountain was the place where you'd go to meet God.
Yeah,
And
but
here's
mountain
this
goats give birth on ledges, on the
huh?
sides. Mountain goats don't give birth on the top of the mountain. They give birth on the side of the mountain on a ledge. Like it's a precarious
Mm-hmm.
birth. It's actually
Mm-hmm.
like incredible when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them don't, you know.
Yeah, they don't make it.
So let me just look at this. What
But I'm
verse is
thinking about the type of animal. I know they're not giving birth on the mountain, but the mountain is symbolic of the place where you go up to meet God.
Yes. Yeah.
And so here's this wild creature. It's also a prey animal. It's not the predator that we just talked about. It would have been the prey of the lion that was just mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he talks about the goat and he talks about the ostrich, and both of those are precarious um births, let's say.
Right, right.
You know, like the ostrich seems to be leaving her young just unattended. And but I do want to say that I did a little ostrich research. And the ostrich's strategy is that they have like a communal nest,
Mm-hmm.
and the matron, the one that the female that has the most seniority, which would mean in the natural world better genes, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
she's smart enough to have that position. Um, all the ostriches lay their eggs together, but she nests on them. She hatches them out. So there would be a time, and it is the same with chickens. They'll lay a clutch. So they'll lay an egg and then they'll leave it, and then they'll lay another one the next day and leave it until they have a number of eggs, and then they begin sitting. Okay. So this is what it would look like for the ostrich, but not only her eggs, but everybody else's eggs are in there. And what the matron does is she keeps her eggs in the center where there's the
Mm-hmm.
safest, because any predators or any clumsy feet are going to get the ones around the edges first, right? And then because she can't possibly hatch out all the eggs that get laid, right? That number gets reduced down. Hers are in the center. And then she nests when she's ready to incubate. She sits down on them and stays there till they hatch. So there is a logic to what seems to be neglect,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Right.
and then the mountain goats. I mean, I don't know much about mountain goats. I when I lived in Telegraph, there were a lot of mountain goats along the steep canyon walls of the Stikine River, and they literally give birth on little tiny ledges. Like it's unbelievable. I couldn't watch, to be honest.
I can't believe they just stand on those things, much less give birth.
Yeah. But I do know from having domestic goats that goats are really prolific. So if
They
you
can
don't
climb
have
anything.
some kind of, well, no, they also reproduce like the wind.
Oh, they
Okay.
do. Okay.
Yeah. They can actually, I've had goats have kid twice in 1 year, which is rare, but it can
It
happen.
happens.
And so, you know, it's nothing for them to have four, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and twins is normal. That's normal. So there has to be some kind of mechanism in place for them to not all the young survive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And because they live so precariously, whatever does survive has to be able to navigate those ledges.
Yeah, and that's what it says in verse 4. It says, their young become strong. They grow up in the open. They go out and don't return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So these are all, again, this is this contradiction, right? It looks really like brutal. It looks like God doesn't care, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why would he make a creature that has a baby on a rock face? Like, come on,
I know, right?
Or an ostrich that doesn't look after her eggs. But really, if you think about it a little bit, there's good reason. There's actually good reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, God is trying to force the listener to take that deeper dive, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Verse 5 says, who has let the wild donkey go free? Who has left the bonds of the swift donkey? To whom I have given the arid plain for his home and the salt land for his dwelling place. He scorns the tumult of the city, and he hears not the shouts of the driver. He ranges the mountains as his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. So we have this wild donkey. One that, like, I love the image of it that God paints. It's just the donkey that's just free on the plain. It's an arid plain, but what else is he doing? He doesn't want to be in the city where he's being driven, made to work. So he's searching after every green thing because the mountains are his pasture. So this is, this wilderness, this sort of desert, and that man's like, for man, the wilderness is a place to go and die.
Yeah.
And here there's this wild donkey who's living. And even it's like, who let the wild donkey go free? There's even the implication that the donkey lived in the city or in the town and broke loose, and God's like, I set it free. I broke it loose.
So here's something interesting to know, and I never knew this, but I went to visit these people and they had donkeys, and they fed them straw, and I'm like, what? Why are they feeding them straw? Like, straw has like zero nutritional value, right? Well, it just so happens that if you feed a donkey hay, it will cause all kinds of health problems. The donkey must live on meager portions.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. So I knew someone who had a donkey who fed it like a horse, and it ended up having thyroid issues. It got it's a thing called Cushing's disease. It had they just get misshapen, like their neck gets enlarged and all this. Yeah. The donkey needs to eat very meager food. Otherwise, it will die or be very sick.
So that's why the arid desert would be a perfect home for it.
Yeah. And he has to search for his food, right? So he has to go far and wide. So he's moving all the time. This is also really important. Horses, mules, donkeys, they if they just stand around, they tend to what we call stock up, especially if they're given a rich feed. So they'll get their feet get swollen inside their hooves, and then what happens, because the hoof is encased, the bones break.
Really?
In their foot. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's called foundering. Okay. And then they're lame and in pain for the rest of their lives. Right.
Oh my gosh.
And what ends up happening is the hoof wall starts to break off, and and then
they can't walk.
Hopefully a wolf or a lion will eat them.
Right.
Okay? Because you don't want them to just wander around with like broken feet. Yeah. So there you go. There, like that is, yeah, there. I'll just leave that. I'll leave it. I think that speaks for itself.
No, that's perfect. So the wild donkey is actually mentioned a few times. I have 3 written down. I think these are the only 3. I'll just read them. So one is in 6:5, which says, this is Job speaking. He says, I'll read verse 2 to give context. Oh, that my vexation were weighed and all my calamity laid in the balances, for it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. The arrows of the Almighty are in me, and my spirit drinks their poison. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. Then here's where he mentions the wild donkey. Does the wild donkey bray when he has grass, or the ox low over his fodder? So that's one part. So he's comparing himself to, he's saying like, there's a reason why I'm crying out.
Yeah,
like the
because
donkey will cry out for food.
well, the donkey won't cry out if he has everything he needs. That's what he's saying there. Like, will the donkey bray over grass? No, he's eating.
Mm-hmm.
Will the ox bray or low over fodder? No, because he's eating. He's happy. So I'm crying out because I don't have. I lack.
Yeah, and what he lacks is any wisdom from his friends. That's what. So he's saying like, you have given me nothing to eat.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to cry out, and my words are rash.
Yeah.
But okay, and then in 11:12, this is Zophar speaking. To give it context, let's see. I'll start at verse 7. Can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? It is higher than the heaven. What can you do? Deeper than Sheol. What can you know? Its measure is longer than the earth and broader than the sea. If he passes through and imprisons and summons the court, who can turn him back? For he knows worthless men. When he sees iniquity, will he consider it? But a stupid man will get understanding when a wild donkey's colt is born a man.
Which will never happen. In other words,
Right.
a stupid man will never get understanding.
Right. It's like when pigs will fly.
Right.
All right. And then I think this is the most interesting and bit for talking about is 24:5 says, I'll start at verse 1 in 24. Why are not times, this is Job speaking. Why are not times of judgment kept by the Almighty? And why do those who know him never see his days? So he's talking about the evil and like, why isn't judgment carried out against the wicked?
Mm-hmm.
Some move landmarks. They seize flocks and pasture them. They drive away the donkey of the fatherless. They take the widow's ox for pledge. They thrust the poor off the road, and the poor of the earth hide themselves. Behold, like wild donkeys and I always get choked up on this part. It is gracious. Behold, like wild donkeys in the desert, the poor go out to their toil seeking game, and the wasteland yields food for their children. They gather their fodder in the field, and they glean the vineyard of the wicked man. They lie all night naked without clothing and have no covering in the cold. They are wet with the rain of the mountains, and they cling to the rock for lack of shelter. Mm. There are those who snatch the fatherless. Okay, that's
yeah.
So this is where Job's comparing to the people that are being oppressed by the wicked, that are cast out, and like the wild donkey, they roam the wilderness looking for food.
Meager food.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like I was choking out because it's like just it's just a heartbreaking image.
Yes, it is.
And it's almost like Job's heart goes out to those people, and then when God talks about them, he doesn't talk about, oh, how sad and poor they are. He's like, who set them free? Who have I given this arid plain to, where they have they search after green? It's like,
not only that, but just think about it. Like if the donkey
Mm-hmm.
has to be fed straw in a domesticated situation because you can't just put them out on pasture or you're going to kill it or make it
Mm-hmm.
very unhealthy. Um, God has designed the donkey, and so when the donkey is free and he's out there looking for every little green thing, right, for miles, going for miles, he's actually like this. This again reminds me of Tomberg saying spiritual freedom is existence.
Mm-hmm.
The donkey is actually being who he is,
Mm-hmm.
even though to us it looks really sad because we think of, you know, abundance, right? Well, we got to have more than, you know, we got to have everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
um and like Nate often says, you know, we have this myth of scarcity, right? We think, so when we see the donkey we think, oh, he doesn't have enough. Look, all the grass is brown.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you took that donkey home, you'd have to feed him brown grass because that's the only thing he could properly live on. So for him,
Right.
his life is abundant.
Yeah.
It's literally abundant, but it appears scarce.
Yeah. And this is it, you know, throughout this whole thing, God's talking about all these animals, and you're like, where is like, but God's also really, he's also talking about people here. And you
Yes.
think about like I've been to the Philippines, I've been to Mexico, I've been to um India, Nepal. I've been to some really poor areas in those countries. Like in the Philippines, there's a trash dump called Smoky Mountain where all the trash from Manila gets brought, and they call it Smoky Mountain because they just pile the trash. They don't necessarily manage it that well, so the garbage underneath gets
Hot.
compacted and starts decomposing, and that heat just sets the whole thing on fire. So it'll spontaneously burst into flames, and just
Yeah.
smoke will be just rolling out of the giant trash heap. But people live on that trash heap.
Yeah. Brutal.
And
That's an image of the donkey and the goat.
right.
No,
But
seriously.
yeah, I mean, I think about those people, but and they like it's both like it was so um I don't know, like you're talking about, like we think we need like maybe that's not a good example because it's just it's part of the city, you know, whereas
Yeah.
like people that live out in like rural um tribal areas or something, we think like, oh, let's go help them, they don't have this or
Don't
that.
have a TV.
Yeah, and like the question is like, what do you think people are for? Like what do you like in you know, you give someone air conditioning and a TV and a refrigerator, and all of a sudden they're getting giant and fat and unhealthy, and their hooves are breaking their bones, and
Exactly.
like we have depression and all these things that like if you go to um like like there were these squatter villages. They're called squatter villages because no one owned the land, or someone owned it, but all these people moved onto it. So
Yeah.
in Manila, so there'll be huge like city blocks where people just build
Yeah,
little
shelters.
huts of like
They have that in India too with the untouchables.
right, and it'd be like tin and pieces of board and
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of brick. The you know people
Whatever they
are
find.
constantly just sort of working on them and mending and then they like go up and they steal electricity from the power line. They run a power line into their house, and they you know, they'll have like a little makeshift antenna and enough to run a little black and white TV, and they'll be watching a soccer game or whatever in there. And you know, we spent a lot of time in this one squatter village, and like the people were amazingly friendly. Like there was a lot of crime and stuff that was happening there, and like a lot of people that were causing trouble and trouble with alcohol and all that. But there was one guy, a Christian guy, And he's like, let me take you to my house. And it was like literally this 2-room hut. And he
Yeah.
welcomed us in and was like, can I get you anything? It's like dirt floor. But he had like a tiny little refrigerator there, and he had a couple drinks in there. And he's like, do you want anything? We're like, no, no, please don't.
Please
but
don't.
but also I remember like when because he came to meet us at the church and stuff, and he had on like this he must have bought it brand new, but it was just a pressed white shirt, button up shirt, and he had slacks on and his sandals, and he was put together and stuff. Um and like we can look at a guy like that and be um like there's so many things you need, and he's got like 5 kids or whatever. They all live in that tiny little
Yeah.
thing with him, and his kids are running around the streets, and it's dangerous and all that stuff. And the guy was just happy, smiling, at least when like he was not someone that struggled with depression. He was full of the love of God. And 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 um yeah, it's amazing. And
Yeah.
and that's not just the one case. Like I've run into that guy in India. I've run into those type of people in Nepal, in
Yeah.
Mexico, and in the poor areas. Like they and Paul Vanderklay has talked about this too in his time
Yes,
as
I
a
was thinking of
Democratic
that.
in the
Dominican.
Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
When he was talking about, he's like, they don't struggle with depression.
No.
No one's committing suicide there because
Oh,
they
there's okay, so this is my theory about that. It's called gratitude. Hello.
Yeah, that's right. That he was so like my Filipino friend, or he was so he was so
Grateful.
thankful for everything.
Of course. Hello. You don't take anything for granted. And you don't have time for bitterness, right? No. No. If you have 5 living children, you're grateful for the 5 that lived, not for you don't fester over the one that died,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you have a fridge with 2 bottles of pop in it, you're grateful for the 2, and you don't think about the 7 that you don't have.
Right.
Like, this is the thing, and you don't even need the 7. Like, who needs 7 pops in their fridge? You know? I think I
Yeah,
just dated myself with that word, sodas or whatever.
I call it
But
pop.
okay, good. But like I the whole time we're talking about that, I was thinking about when we moved to Telegraph Creek. So like we went from living in a house in a neighborhood in Switzerland on the
Mm-hmm.
Lake of Zurich, which is called the Gold Coast. I mean, we weren't wealthy. We were actually just lower middle class was
Mm-hmm.
our income. But we had the luxury of being able to purchase a house at a really good price at the time when we got married. And then we moved to Telegraph Creek, and suddenly we didn't have running water. We didn't have a toilet in the house. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have a store where we could just go get everything. We couldn't consume, right? We couldn't shop. We couldn't window shop. We couldn't go to the
Mm-hmm.
candy store. We couldn't, the doctor's office there was a nursing station in town for emergencies and stuff, but everything was gone, and then all of a sudden, everything that you had, you became super grateful for,
Mm.
because you had it, because it was there, and you didn't have to go get it, which meant driving for 9 hours or 8 hours or whatever, and there was just this. I can remember having these feelings of absolute abundance when in the fall we would butcher the goats, we would take in the garden, and then those winter meals, those fall winter meals were all stuff that we provided.
Mm-hmm.
And you just sit there and you look and you feel like a king. Like you did,
Yeah.
because you had
you had meat and you had vegetables and you had potatoes and it was just your life was one of abundance, not one of scarcity. And it's so interesting because you literally are living in scarcity. You're living in scarcity, right? You live in a world where not everything is at your fingertips, but you have the sense that it's totally abundant. So the opposite must also be true, Jess. That if you live in abundance, you have the sense of scarcity. Right?
Right. Yeah, that's powerful, Shari.
Yeah.
All right. Let me move on to the wild ox. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind him in the furrow with ropes, or will he harrow the valleys after you?
I just want to say this really quick, Jess.
Yeah.
In King James, it says unicorn.
Oh, does it? I knew there was some translation that said unicorn.
Yeah. It says unicorn. I love it. It sounds.
Let me see this. Yeah, it's saying the Hebrew means wild bull.
Yeah, it's just horned.
But the King James says unicorn.
I
think I read somewhere people were saying is the rhinoceros.
Yeah.
Like the rhinoceros is a wild ox.
No way. Can't imagine.
But okay, so will you depend on him because his strength is great, and will you leave to him your labor? Do you have faith in him that he will return your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? Let me see. 24:3. It's mentioned one other time in 24 verse 3. So that was I already read it. It's in that same section about the wild donkey. It's where the widow, they take the widow's ox for a pledge, and then and then there's kind of reference to it where they gather their fodder in a field and glean the vineyard of the wicked man. And so it's talking about the poor, how they're gleaning the vineyard and carrying carrying the sheaves among the olive rows. Like these people that work for the wicked that are oppressing them, they're like the ox that's doing all the work, and they're not getting anything back. And that's like how they're being oppressed is they're doing. I think it says somewhere we talked about that where they're doing it on an empty stomach,
right?
Like bringing in the food on an empty stomach.
Yeah, while they hunger. Yeah, treading the winepress while they thirst.
Right.
Yeah.
And you talked about like the inherent dignity in that.
Yes.
And I think some of that is hinted here in the image of the wild ox, where the wild ox is not going to do the work. It's not the wild ox is the one that because he has great strength and because he can do this labor doesn't mean you can get him to. And
you can't really trust him because he's wild. Yeah.
And there's an interesting thing here is in the nativity scenes, like in the earliest Christian depictions of the nativity, there's always
ox and ass.
Ox and an ass there.
Jonathan Peugeot did a thing on that. Did you ever watch it?
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, I can't remember what it represented anymore. It's been a while.
I can't remember the specifics, but the donkey is an unclean animal, and the ox is a clean animal. So that was part of the dietary things where you could eat one and not the other. So you can't.
And there you have these two seeming contradictions:
the clean and the unclean.
Yeah. Opposite.
And in the nativity, it's the domesticated version. It's the donkey that, like Job had in the beginning. He had like all these donkeys that people used to ride. It was transportation. And then the ox was there because it was used to help with agriculture. And here we have the wild versions of these. So these are the ones that can't be tamed, the ones that
God's looking after.
Right. Yeah.
These are God's children.
Yeah, well, we were before we started recording, we were talking about all our pets.
Right.
Like, these are God's pets.
Yeah.
This is all the things that you can sense, the way that, like, we were talking about the stupid things our cats did or whatever. Yeah. But like when we talk about it, we were laughing and we were like kind of in we were like, can you believe the cat would do that? And we're and it's almost like God, it's like Chesterton says, like God is marveling at what is happening.
Right. And just as we were marveling at the cat's catness or the dog's dogness, right?
Yeah.
So is God marveling at the ox's oxenness and the donkey's donkeyness.
Right.
This is God sees things for what they are again. I just love to point this out because I think when I say that, I'm very conscientious that I'm using the word are, which comes from the verb to be.
To be.
Which means existence. So just remember that, folks, whenever I say is, are,
to be.
I'm thinking of the to be
right.
or not to be, because we spend so much time trying to figure out what we are, who we should be, right? That I think that we just stop living, to be honest. We stop being.
Yep.
And if you can hold the tension of your own contradictions, you can transcend all those questions, right? And you can actually love the person that God loves, right? Because he loves you.
Right.
And to not love you in that way, to not be and be alive, is to not appreciate, is to not have gratitude towards God for your life.
That's right.
And personally, I think all of this separating things out into camps, of wicked and righteous and elect and unelect, and all it does is busy your mind with which camp do I want to get into. It's like, I got to get my membership to the country club before I die, right? And then what happens? You forgot to live.
Right.
And you forgot to realize that you are in the country club. Right? And that the owner of the country club is actually your dad. It's just that simple for me.
It's just
maybe too simple.
All right, which brings us right to the ostrich.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so the wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are they the pinions and plumage of love? Now, there's
I want to say something. I listened to Gad Saad yesterday, and he was talking about evolutionary biology, and he mentioned the peacock. So in my King James, it talks about the peacock first and then the ostrich. I think actually Chesterton mentions that peacock too.
Yeah, he does.
So it says, "Gavest thou the goodly wings unto the peacocks." So it's obviously talking about these like enormous tail feathers, right, of the peacock. And Gad Saad said, what's interesting about the peacock is that if there is a male strutting around with the most incredible tail feathers, the female looks at him and realizes that that has cost him something. And I thought this was really interesting. So in order to be the most beautiful male, He had to drag around this 3-foot long thing that puts him at risk
His whole life.
his whole life, right? And
Yeah.
not only that, but he has learned to overcome obstacles, get away from predators before they can grab his 3-foot tail, right?
Mhm.
All that stuff. And so, of course, genetically speaking, evolutionarily speaking, he's become like the most adept, the best version of the peacock that is out there,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
But all of that cost him something.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that applies to this verse, but I just thought that that was really interesting because
No, I think that's good.
I think that's a seeming contradiction too, right? Like, why does this peacock have this dumb tail? Like it doesn't make any sense in a world of eat or be eaten,
Mhm.
right? You'd want to be the most slick, the quickest, the less conspicuous you are, the better, all that stuff. And the peacock is none of those.
Mhm.
None of those.
Yeah,
But,
and it kind
but
of.
the female, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, the female looks at that and she says, okay, I like him because that cost him something. Right?
That's good. I
Which
like
is really
that.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's there, and because in another translation it says the wings of the ostrich flap joyfully but cannot match the pinions and feathers of the stork. So the stork can fly, and the ostrich there doesn't really say ostrich, it says the bird of piercing cries. And it's one of those obscure words that like only shows up in the book of Job.
Peacock actually has a piercing cry.
So that must be why they translated peacock in some
It
places.
sounds like a cat fighting.
Yeah. And so it's sort of the uselessness of the wings.
I know this sound because my neighbor has some. And I
Some
hear
peacocks?
them all the time. Yeah, I hear them all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And they sound like a cat.
Yeah, they sound like a cat. Like cats when they're fighting.
Yeah, I hate that sound.
That's what they sound like.
Oh my.
Yeah. So like all the coyotes are like cling. They're over
Lunch.
lunch.
So it's comparing the uselessness of the feathers of the peacock or ostrich. It works in both ways, I think. But it's also comparing that to the stork, which is a bird of flight, and the stork flies beautifully. Like when it's soaring, it's huge. It's just like,
yeah.
It's not one of those clumsy birds like an albatross or something.
They have in Switzerland. There's a village just up behind ours called Uttwil, and they must be on some kind of migratory path. Have been for centuries, right? But they're famous for their storks, and so that village puts up like these platforms for the storks to build their nests.
Oh,
excuse me. And there's storks everywhere.
wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
So they're comparing the way the uselessness of the wings compared to the usefulness of the wings, but it's also comparing because it says the bird of piercing cries with the kind bird. Like there's even like sort of a temperamental distinction between this bird that screams and the nice bird that flies gracefully. And so and they're all part of God's creation, and God is
there's another interesting thing about peacocks. So there's a town outside of Vancouver called Surrey, just on the other side of the river, and they have a serious peacock problem.
Oh, really?
People are like going crazy because these peacocks are territorial for one thing. So like my neighbor has some, and then my other neighbor got a pair, and one of them her dog ate. And then so now she wants to give me the female, but the problem is they had to be raised and kept confined for at least 6 months Otherwise, they'll leave the area and find their own territory. So they're kind of hard to, what do they call it? They call it something now. Establish. They have to be established, right? And but that also works in their favor, because so now they've got a bunch of wild peacocks in Surrey, and they have established, right? And that means that they'll never leave your neighborhood.
Nice.
And people have, like, they were showing on the news, you know, people had peacocks like roosting on their bedroom windowsill, doing that
Screaming,
cat calling, okay, at like 4 a.m.
Yeah.
You can imagine. And people want them
gosh.
gone, and they can, you know, then they have all these pet or these animal lovers who won't get rid of them. And so somehow, you know, in spite of their long tail feathers and their piercing cries, they're flourishing. It's working for them. That sure is in Surrey.
That's crazy.
They have way too many of them.
Can people kill them? Can you just lop off the head of a...
I bet you people do. They send their son out with a slingshot, you know,
Right.
and he accidentally hits.
Oops. The cat got one.
Yeah.
Okay. You talked a little bit about the eggs before. So leaving the eggs on there, forgetting a foot may crush them. Let's talk about this. She deals cruelly with her young as if they were not hers. Though her labor be in vain, yet she has no fear. Because God has made her forget wisdom and given her no share in understanding.
So funny, because it actually says she is hardened against her young as though they were not hers. Well, they literally aren't, most of them. Like, you know, from what I told you, because it's a community nest, right? So,
right.
And so, yeah, and her labor is in vain without fear. Interesting.
I think, you know, I'm thinking
Makes
about...
you sound dumb, yeah.
I'm thinking about Job, and because of the disasters that struck him, how he was so he's like, there's terrors in the night because of what's happened to me. Job's basically like suffering from PTSD or something like that. And here God is pointing out a creature. This is like God being contradictory again.
Yeah.
Here God is pointing out a creature that not only doesn't treat the young like Job treated his kids.
Yeah.
She has no fear. And so it's this weird sort of balance between, like, God's like showing Job the possibility of having no fear, while also saying, like, there's a reason why you have fear and are terrified. Right. Because you do have wisdom, and you do care. But look at this. Here's this crazy bird that, you know, that lives out in the waste, that has this piercing cry. Let me read in 30 verse 29. It's mentioned. Job mentions 30 verse 29. Okay. I'll start at verse 24. I'll start at 25. Did I not weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But when I hoped for good, evil came, and when I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. My days of affliction come to meet me. I go about darkened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. That's the screaming cry. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. My lyre is turned to mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. So he's this is one of those times where he's like, I'm like the ostrich. I'm in the wilderness crying, screaming, because of what's happened to me. And here God is pointing out this aspect of the ostrich. And he's like, here's this, and then it kind of comes to conclusion here when he says, when she rouses herself to flee, she laughs at the horse and rider.
Yeah.
And here's this dumb bird, doesn't take care of its young, isn't wise at all, but look at her run.
Yeah.
And again, this is like one of those times where God is marveling at his creation in a way. And
there's also that the whole aspect to these examples often that their strength is made perfect in weakness, which is a coincidence of opposites in itself, right? Which I think reflects back on Christ. Jesus is hanging on a cross. He's dead. Everybody's laughing at him, right? They're saying, can't you get yourself down? Right? He looks helpless. He doesn't look like he's helping anybody, not least of all himself. Okay. But what's happening there is the act of creation.
Right.
Like it's below the like you were saying last time, it's what the foundations are set upon. Okay. So it doesn't appear to be anything important. It doesn't appear to make any sense. It doesn't appear to even be working the thing that Jesus implied that it would.
Right.
None of it looks like what it is. Okay. And we can all look back at that historically and say, well, of course it was. Right.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense to us, but not even to the disciples did it make any sense when it happened. They were just crushed. He's dead. It's over. Run and hide. Right. Now they're going to eliminate all his followers. And so I mean,
I remember, I don't remember anything from The Passion of the Christ, that movie, Mel Gibson's movie. I only remember one scene, and it was when, like, he's carrying the cross. He's just absolutely drenched in his own blood. And he sees his mother, and he looks up at her and goes, "See, mother." I can break up again. I'm making all things new.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
And just like, Jesus, you're crazy. You're dying.
Right.
Like, what you're like, there was that's a man like at his lowest going to his crucifixion, just covered in blood, and there he is. And
literally downtrodden, literally under the weight of his own death.
And he's like, look at me, look what I'm doing.
Right.
I'm making all things new. And you're like, holy crap.
Yeah. And that's why, like, in that conversation with Nate and Jed the other day, I said he wears the thorns like a crown. Like he seriously does. I was thinking about that this morning, actually, when I got up.
Yeah.
But Jesus, what we think Jesus is doing and what he's actually doing are two different things. We look at it and we see, oh, he's a victim. He's been crucified. He was pierced. It's all happening to him. But like John Bear said, when he talked about the Virgin Mary, he said, it's not so much about her being a virgin, but about Christ willing to be born in her. Okay. He willed to die, not my will, but your will. Right. And so everything that's happening there, he's doing. It's an act. It's a doing. Right.
Right.
So who put the crown of thorns on his head? He did.
You wear it like a crown.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't remember if we talked about this in the podcast, but we've talked about it before, which is that there's, God can come across kind of harsh towards Job. There's an intensity with which God comes at Job with. And you're like, geez, God, you're kind of a jerk. Here's this guy that you've crushed, and now you're gonna berate him, and then, where were you and how dare you, all this stuff.
Right.
But I think people don't really think about like the intensity with which Job defended his own integrity.
Yes.
So Job has something unseen within him. That was his integrity, that was his righteousness that only God saw.
Yeah.
And Satan didn't believe he had it. Job's friends don't believe he has it.
Which means he probably couldn't see it either.
Right. Couldn't see it. He's like, the only reason why he's wealthy and successful is because you protect him, God. It's not because there's actually anything good about him. And God says, okay.
Yeah.
And so there's two characters in the book that know about Job's, sort of hidden integrity. It's God and Job.
Mm-hmm.
And then like that's the one thing that sort of Job never takes for granted, and he defends. Like that's why his friends.
Well, Jess,
that's why his friends condemn him, is because he's so adamant about it.
We should actually read. There's a couple of verses, and I don't know where they are. Maybe I'll look them up. Where Job talks about his integrity, and he refuses to compromise it.
He says, my integrity will be the reason why God will hear me in the end.
Right.
He says crazy stuff like that, and you're just like, Job, you're a madman. And Elihu says like he talks like a wicked person, and brings, and so there's a way in which Job is defending this sort of hidden integrity that no one can see. He can only just insist on it.
Let me just read this here.
Mm-hmm.
It's Job 27. Job says, as God lives, who has taken away my justice, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me, that I should say you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me as long as I live.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so think
and
about,
that's something nobody can see.
No one can see. And then we have the poem to wisdom, which is talking about the hidden wisdom of God behind all things. Yeah. And then here God comes in this intensity. And it's actually an intensity that mirrors Job's intensity.
Yeah.
And so it's not on God. It's like God is defending the hidden goodness behind everything. And he's doing it by, he's saying it's not what it looks like. Because that's what Job's saying. He's like, it's not what it looks like. I know I've suffered the fate of the wicked. All of chapter 27 is about how he's suffered the fate of the wicked. He says, this is what the wicked will suffer. And then he lists all the things that happened to him. And so he's like, I know what it looks like. It looks like this is what's happened, but I will not give up my integrity. And this is what God's doing. God's listing out all the crazy things. The lion preying on the young.
Yeah.
Or the lion getting prey for its young. The mountain goats giving birth out on the edges of cliffs. The ostrich who doesn't have wisdom and doesn't care. Like all these sort of wild things are happening. And he's basically saying, I think God's saying it's not what it looks like.
Well, here, I got to read this. This is another Meister Eckhart quote that
Mm-hmm.
I found yesterday. The inner eye. Are you looking for God using the same eyes you employ to perceive temporal things? That won't work. God is not like colors in the sky. What you see with those old eyes of yours is something else. It is not God. And so what Meister Eckhart is saying, and what Job is saying, what God is saying with the wisdom poem is you can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You can't see it with these eyes, with these old eyes of yours. You need to use the other eye.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you read all this stuff in God's speech, like what we read today, your old eyes say, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's what your old eyes tell you. But like Meister Eckhart says, that isn't God. And God even says in the beginning, you're obscuring me, who I am, right? You're darkening. And he wants to reveal himself. And then this is how he's doing it. And you can't think. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you can't think about these things as unknowable. You actually have to think about them as knowable. Because what God is doing is the same thing he's doing to Job is he's pushing you to search deeper than what you see with your eyes. Because everything appears to make no sense. Okay? And I mean, if you look at the book of Job as a whole, what we're talking about here is our lives, okay? The life of the human being on the earth, one of pain and suffering. And we're too many people, in my opinion, are too satisfied by saying it doesn't make sense and then moving on. And when they do that, they're not looking for that very precious thing, right? They're not turning over mountains by the roots. They're not doing any of that stuff from the wisdom poem. They're simply just ignoring it because they think that they can't make sense of it. God wants Job to make sense of it, but it isn't going to be what his eyes see. It never will be.
Yeah, and it's like it can't be explained. Like some people think that God's not explaining it to Job on purpose. Like, why don't you just explain it, God?
No, because as soon as
Chesterton says he's like, it can't be explained.
No, it can't be because it isn't rational.
No.
Okay, so this is like what Desmond talks about when he says you have to climb the ladder of rationality to get to irrationality. And when you arrive there, that none of that is explainable because it's simply irrational. Okay, that's why I thought it was interesting at the beginning of God's speech that he talks about measurement, because that is he's appealing to the rational. Okay, so it's like the rational is in place so that curiosity is somehow what's the word, aroused, right? In a person, they become curious because the rational goes, oh, I don't get that. So now I have to figure it out, right? That's what God wants.
Right. Well, but God's also pointing, for me, God's pointing like to the limit of rationality. He's like, have you tried to measure the foundation of the earth? So like the measurement is the rationality, but the foundation of the earth, how are you going to measure that?
Right. And so it's not about finding a rational solution or a rational answer. It's about enticing the rational aspect of the human being to search.
Right.
Search, right?
Right.
And become that miner from the Job 28. You know, become that person who turns mountains over by the roots. Because then you will come to wisdom. And when you do that, you will depart from evil.
Right.
That's how it works, people. It's, you know, it's just
that's how it works.
Seek and you will find, but it won't be what you think, and it won't be what these old eyes see. Okay. So you have to climb the ladder of rationality rung by rung until you break out into irrationality. But what is that? What is that movement? It's transcendence, right? It's now you've transcended the world, the rational world, right? And
God says, or Job says that at the end. He says, "I've heard of you before, but now I see you."
Right.
And that's that movement from hearing to seeing, and like when you behold something, you take it in, but and you can, it's witnessing the whole as a whole, and you can definitely search out the parts, but you can't reduce it to any one thing or another. You just have to say, I've seen something, you need to see it too. And they're like, explain it. I can't. You have to see it.
Yeah, well, explain a sunset.
Yeah.
Explain your son's birth.
Yeah, explain it without using poetry. Like, explain it.
Yeah.
You can't.
You know, if you explained your son's birth, it would sound gross, and it wasn't. Right? Like it was one of the most beautiful moments in your life, I assume. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Come on.
It's a safe assumption.
Let's pretend. Yeah.
All
well,
right.
You know what I'm getting at.
No, I totally do. Do you give the horse do you give the horse his might, or do you clothe his neck with a mane? I think it's funny because they just said about how the ostrich laughs at the horse and rider. So here's the dumb bird, the foolish bird. Look at her run and look at her laugh, and she's laughing. She's running faster than the horse and rider.
Right.
And then now we're going to look at the horse. And so there's like, we're going to look at the thing the dumb bird was laughing at now. And do you give the horse its might? Do you make him leap like the locust? His majestic snorting is terrifying. He paws in the valley and exults in his strength, and he goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed. He does not turn back from the sword. Upon him rattle the quiver and the flashing spear and the javelin. With fierceness and rage, he swallows the ground, and he cannot stand still at the sound of the trumpet. When the trumpet sounds, he says, "Aha," and he smells the battle from afar, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. So we have this like war scene, and the horse can, like, what we understand why men go to battle. Because we're people. We understand why people go into war. We understand the, why that would appeal. But why is the horse wanting to charge in? What is in it for the horse? There's something in his heart that's going to go do that. This lack of fear, where he hears the trumpet and he just cannot wait to just swallow the ground.
I'm just thinking about that horse and rider statement, like the ostrich. She runs and laughs at the horse and rider. I think there's something interesting there, actually, because the ostrich seems to be very self-centered, right? Like the description of the ostrich sounds super independent, doesn't need anybody, not even her own children.
Right.
The horse and rider, on the other hand, That the reason that the horse goes into battle like that is because he is bound to the rider.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's something there. Like,
Hmm.
this is something about horses that has always given me pause, and really I stand in awe of, because I've had a lot of animals. I've had a lot of close relationships to animals, but the one that you experience with the horse as the rider, it really is like Avatar, like where they join those
Like a
little
mind meld.
thingy things, you know.
Yeah.
It is. It's really like that. And it's one animal that will do what it doesn't want to do for you. Okay? Because that's what you're going to do. And if there's something about that bond that makes the horse that amazing. Like my sister always
Not
said,
my will, but your will.
yeah, my sister always said to me, there's something very special about horses, because Jesus is coming back on one. Right?
That's right. Yeah, that's amazing.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very spiritual connection, actually, I have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're not even like dogs. Dogs can.
Disney ruined horses by making them all act like dogs.
Yeah.
There's a trope in animation where basically all animals act like dogs.
Yeah.
On screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities, and we'll probably look at it some, but we can look at it now, but we'll look at it also when we get to Leviathan. There's references here to what's happening in Leviathan. We have the spear and the javelin.
Right.
Let me just read a little bit of 41. Or is it 42? 41. Yeah, just listen to this and think about what we just read about the horse. It says in verse 12, God saying this of Leviathan, I will not keep silence concerning his limbs or his mighty strength or his goodly frame. Who can strip off his outer garment? Who can come near him with a bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth is terror. Let me go to verse 18. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches, and sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils come forth smoke as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and flames come forth from his mouth. In his neck abides strength, and terror dances before him. The folds of his flesh stick together, firmly cast and immovable. His heart is as hard as a stone, as hard as a lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. At the crashing, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it does not avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He counts iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. The arrows cannot make him flee. For him, slinging stones are turned to stubble. Clubs are counted as stubble, and he laughs at the rattle of the javelins. His underparts are like sharp potsherds, and he spreads himself like the threshing sledge on the mire. There seems to be some sort of connection between the war horse and Leviathan, specifically verse 23, which says, okay, so the war horse, upon him rattle the quiver, the flashing spear, and the javelin. And then of Leviathan, it says, he laughs at the rattle of the javelins. The javelin, the rattle is the javelin on the horse as he's riding in.
Right.
So I don't know what to make of any of that, but I thought I'd point it out.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting.
And there seems to be some sort of connection, not directly, but where the horse, with fierceness and rage, he swallows the ground, and Leviathan, where he spreads himself like a threshing
Yeah.
sledge on the mire. Like those two images.
Yeah.
And then I mean, there's obvious.
Yeah. The movement of the horse it's like it's swallowing, right? When it's running. Yeah.
And then there's connections between in Revelation where Christ comes on the horse, and then there's the dragon.
Right.
So all that's at play here.
Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah. But let's finish up here. Verse 26. Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spread his wings toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest on high? On the rock he dwells and makes his home on the rocky crag and stronghold. From there he spies out the prey. His eyes behold it from far away. His young ones suck up blood where the slain are. There he is. And this comes right after the war horse, and then we have the young ones. Like it's almost like the battle is over, and then the birds of prey come in to
Yeah, you have the
feed.
war horse and the scenes of, or the drama of the war, and then yeah, interesting.
And this also connects back to the beginning of the section we read about, which was the lion sitting in wait for prey, and then because they have cubs, and so who provides that for them? And then we have the eagles, or the hawk and the eagle, and then they're gathering food for their young
Off the bodies of human beings.
It sounds like it.
Sounds like it.
And so there's
Did I get that wrong?
No, I don't think so. And there's a chiasm here.
Yeah.
So the front and the lion and the eagle, and those match up. And then we go to the mountain goats, or sorry, the lion and the
Eagle.
getting prey for its young, and the young ones eating the blood. Then we have the mountain goats and the hawk and the eagle making their nests on the mountaintops. Then we have the ox and the donkey, and matching that up with the war horse. And then right in the middle we have the ostrich, which is the creature without wisdom. So I think there's a chiastic structure there that sort of centers around the ostrich, and
I always like to think of the ostrich as the wisdom of God is foolishness to men.
Yeah.
I think that's like the center of that chiasm right there.
Yeah. Well, and then try to think about that as the hidden wisdom of God. Like what is God doing with the ostrich?
Right. It's hidden, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you said, like it, you have to look at the ostrich and you have to be like, what is it doing when it just leaves its eggs in the desert? Like, and then the fact is it's not what it looks like.
Right.
There's a way in which, and all of this is leading toward life and strength and lack of fear. And, this, everything's about things that are being and living, and it's taking everything in. It's not saying, oh, this is bad, this is good, this is whatever. Like it's everything all happening.
Right. Like that's why I keep thinking about it as God talking about actual existence, right? Like because existence is messy, right? Like it doesn't appear to be fair or fun or any of that, right?
Yeah, and this is exactly what you said in the beginning, is like the reason why Job says that he wants to be unborn is because he knows to live is to suffer, and to be is to suffer.
Yeah.
And it seems like God is validating all of that.
Right. And here there's an exuberance for life, even though overshadowing it always is this contradiction, which is
Mm-hmm.
death.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we live in, right?
Yep. And then, but within all of that, God is giving himself to his creation.
Exactly.
He's constantly pouring himself out. He's constantly serving.
Yeah.
He's not judging the lions. He's not judging
No.
the ostrich, this stupid bird.
Yeah.
He's
He's letting
sort
it
of
be.
reveling in everything.
Well, he's reveling in their beingness,
Right.
right? In their ostrichness, in their
Mhm.
donkeyness, in their lionness, in all their
Yeah. In what
in
they
all
are.
in all of what they are. And
Mhm.
that's why I had that little long rant about us distracting ourselves from who we are by trying to figure out who we are
Mhm.
and not living.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. With gratitude, like we
With
talked about
gratitude.
earlier. Yeah. For this beautiful life.
Mhm.
I was telling you earlier that I had to clean windows today, and I have some really big, huge windows in my house because I wanted them and I love them. I didn't really want to clean them, but I had to actually be grateful that I have them
Yeah.
while I clean them. Like, we're always having to deal with this
Mhm.
stuff, you know, and we can, I know I'm not perfect at it, but I've really made the effort to be grateful, even when I don't feel like it.
Right.
And and then suddenly your life is abundant.
Yep. A
Yeah.
whole world opens up to you.
Because then suddenly I'm just going, oh my God, look at my windows. They're amazing. Like I have these, they're mine,
They're so clean.
and they're super clean now. I'm so grateful for my windows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, Shari, thank you once again.
Mm-hmm.
Until next time.
Thanks, Jess.
Thanks.